Okay, let's talk about creating a catching game. So, as we get started, you've probably went to either the create button at the top of your screen or you went up to file and you chose new. Either way, it probably says untitled up here. So, what I would like you to do is name this catching game. Make sure you've given that a name and then go ahead and choose save now so that you can save that. So let's go ahead and get started. In your catching game, you are required to have three backgrounds. And so for this demonstration here, I'm going to choose three backgrounds also. So I'm going to come down here to the backdrops on the stage area. And you've got 3 or 4 different ways to choose backdrop. You can choose it from the sprite library. You can search there. You can paint your own. You can choose a surprise backdrop, or you can upload a backdrop um, of a different picture that's not in the sprite library or in the backdrop library. So I'm going to go ahead and come back down to the choose backdrop, and I'm going to use a beach or ocean type theme for all 3 of mine. So I'm going to start off with Beach Malibu. I'm going to add that one. I'm going to come back and I'm going to choose Beach Rio. And last one, I'm going to choose another kind of ocean theme here. I'm going to choose the boardwalk. All right, so I have 3 backdrops chosen. I'm going to come over to my backdrops tab, and that first backdrop was plain white. I'm going to go ahead and delete that so I no longer have it. And now next thing I would need to do is I need to choose my characters for my catching game, my sprites. And so I'm going to click on the cat. I do not want my cat for the catching game. You're going to need to choose 2 sprites. You need to choose a sprite that is going to fall, that's going to get caught. That way you can earn points. And you need to choose a sprite that is going to do the catching. And so again, you're going to go to choose a sprite just like you did with choosing a backdrop. You can choose from the library, sprite library. You could paint one, you could choose a surprise one, or you could upload one. I'm going to go ahead and just choose from the sprite library. Sorry, it went to uploads. Let's try this again. And it looks like it accidentally chose a bell for me. So I'll go ahead and choose a couple more, and then I can delete that bell. So I'm going to start with what I want to have falling from the sky. And I'm going to choose some pretty um, boring things to use as my game items because I don't want you copying off of me. I want you choosing something more interesting that you like better. So what I'm going to have falling from the sky is going to be button 5 here. So I'm going to choose that. I'm going to go ahead and come back to this bell and delete it because I don't need that. So my X is going to be what's falling from the sky. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to choose something to be a catching tool. And to do that, I was going to choose the paddle. There we go. I'll choose the paddle. All right. So my X is going to be falling from the sky. My paddle is going to be trying to catch that. And so here we go. We're going to start off with programming and coding what you have, your character that's going to be falling. And as you're working along with me, I'm hoping that you are choosing your own sprites for this and starting to build your base game along with me. So I'm going to come to my X here, which is what I want to have falling from the sky. And so to start our game, I'm going to go to Events, and I'm going to choose When Green Flag Clicked. And then the next thing we have to do is we want, when our X falls every single time, we don't want it falling from the same position every time. We want it to go to a random spot at the top of the screen that we won't know where it's falling from until we see it starting to fall. That way it makes it a little bit more challenging to catch it. And so we are going to choose from the motion category a go-to command, and we're going to choose random position. Now, to get our X to start at the top of the screen every time, we've got it starting at a random position, but we want it to fall from the top. And so we have to tell it that it needs to start at the top. And our screen, the x-axis behind our screen, your center point, your point of origin is 0, 0. From that point to the top of the screen is 180. So it goes up to y180. And so we want the X to start at the top of the screen. So we need to find the button that says Set Y. So we're going to come down here and we're going to choose Set Y. And we are going to put 180 in for Set Y. Then we need a forever command. We need that X to fall continuously toward the bottom of the screen. And we want it to fall at a consistent speed. And so for it to fall, it will be going in a negative direction down the y-axis. So we're going to be doing a change y by command. And in that change y by command, we're going to choose a -5. So we're going to have it fall forever by a -5 y on the y-axis. If you wanted it to go slower, your number would need to be smaller. If you would want it to fall faster, your number would need to be larger. So a -2 would make it fall slower. A -10 would make it fall faster. Next thing I need to do is I need an if-then command. An if-then command is in the control category, and it's right below the forever. If you haven't used an if-then command yet, what it does is if one thing happens, and that's going to be what's going to fall in this little hole right here, then something else has to happen, and that's what you're going to put here in this little area. So we're going to put an operator in there, and we're going to use less than sign. So we are going to grab this that has the two spots where we can put something in there, less than sign. We want to choose the one that's pointing to the left. And so in this first hole, we're going to go back to motion. And we want to choose Y position. So we're going to come down here and get this little bubble called Y position. And we're going to put it in that first hole. In the second spot, we need to tell it if the Y position, if the X has fallen all the way to the bottom of the screen, then it needs to respawn and go back to the top. Now, when we started this, we said the top of the screen was 180 from the point of origin or from the center. So the bottom of the screen would be a -180, but we want it to respawn to the top just before it completely disappears out of the bottom of the screen. So we want to do a -170 Y instead of a -180. And if it reaches a Y position of a -170 or less than a -170, then what we want it to do is we're going to come back up here. I can pull this down. I can pull this away. We want to take these two blocks and we want to duplicate these two blocks. And we want to put them right back in there. We'll put everything back together. And now you see that our X has started to fall from random points, and when it gets to the bottom of the screen, it respawns back up to the top and continues to fall again. And it will do that forever until it gets caught by what you're using as your catching tool. And for me, that'll be my paddle. But I haven't set my paddle up yet with any code to make that happen. So let's go do that next. So let's go ahead and hit the stop sign to make that stop. And let's go to the paddle and give our paddle some code so that we can catch. So once again, we're going to go to the events tab or the events category, and we're going to get a when green flag clicked. And we want to set it up so that if we want to use the arrow keys to make your paddle move back and forth, we can do that. And so we want to use a forever. And then we want to use an if then inside of our forever. And we're going to go this time to sensing instead of operators, because we want the computer to be able to sense if we are using, for example, your left arrow and your right arrow to make the paddle move. And so I'm going to start by finding this one where it says key space pressed. I'm going to put that in there, and I can change this to my right arrow. So my paddle is going to move right and left on the screen and at the bottom of the screen, so I can actually drag my paddle down here to the bottom of the screen. And it's going to go right and left once I have this set up. So if my paddle is going to go to the right, if I'm using my right arrow, that means it's going in a positive direction on the x-axis. And so we need to tell it when the right arrow key is pressed, anytime that the right arrow key is pressed. So the computer is going to be forever checking to see if you're touching the right arrow. And if you are touching the right arrow, we want to change our x-axis. We want to change our x by 10. And that's going to, as long as you're holding down on that arrow key, that's going to make that paddle move by 10 continuously. Now, we also want our paddle to be able to move to the left because we want to catch things on the left side of the screen. So we're going to go back and we're going to grab an if-then statement again. We're going to put it right underneath of the other if-then statement inside of the forever block. And we are going to do the same thing. We're going to go back and go to that sensing category. We're going to find that key space pressed, put it in here, and we don't want to use the space key. We want to use the left arrow. And next, to make it go right, we used positive movement on the x-axis, so we moved a positive 10 steps. If we want to go left, we have to use a negative movement on the x-axis. So we're going to get that change x by. Right now it's still positive, so I need to click in there. And I need to put a negative in front of my 10. Okay, so if I press the green flag, now my X is dropping, my paddle can move, but nothing happens. My X goes right through my paddle. So it looks like I have some more coding to do. So let's go back to our X that's falling, and we need to give it some more code. So I'm going to move this code over a little bit so I have some space to do some more coding. And so what I want to do is I want to program this so that if it touches the paddle, it will actually respawn back to the top of the screen. And I also want to set up a scoreboard so that I can start earning points for catching this particular X as it falls. So we're going to go back and we're going to grab a green flag. And then we need another forever loop because we want that computer to always and forever be checking to see if that X is touching the paddle, to see if we've actually caught the X. And so inside that forever loop, we need another if then. And we need to know if the X is touching the paddle. And so that's going to be under sensing. That's going to be the first one under sensing that says touching mouse pointer. But instead, I'm going to move this over just a little. And instead, we're going to choose paddle because it already knows that you have the paddle as one of your sprites. So we're going to choose paddle. And if it hits the paddle, then I want a sound to happen. I want to be able to hear that I've caught it. So I'm going to go to sounds. We're already preloaded with a pop. If you don't like a pop noise for catching whatever you have falling, if you need a different noise, then you can go out and right here and you can choose a new sound. But I'm going to go ahead and stick with my pop sound. And so since I already know that's loaded into my X, I'm going to come back to my code and I'm going to go to the sounds group and I am going to choose start sound pop, and I'm going to put it right there. And the next thing I need to do is I need to make my score change, which means I need a scoreboard. So I'm going to go over here to variables, and I need to make a variable. So I'm going to click on that make a variable button, and I'm going to call this variable score. I'm going to go ahead and let it be set for all sprites. I'm going to hit OK. And so now I should have a scoring variable, except for I'm not seeing it right now. Oh, there it is. So it's on the drop-down menu. All right. So I am going to want to change my score by 1 every time that I catch that X. So after I play the sound pop, I want to change the score by 1 point every single time. And I also want my scoreboard to start at 0 at the beginning of the game. So when that green flag is clicked, I want to set my scoreboard to 0. All right. I'm not sure why that doesn't say score, but there we go. We can click on it and close that out. So now we just have a scoreboard. Okay. So next thing that we have to do. So we've got it so it's going to score. If it does touch the paddle, plays the sound pop, changes the score by +1, then as soon as it hits the paddle and it does that, we want the X to respawn back up to the top. We don't want the X to fall through the paddle. So we are going to take this random position set Y to 180 that we had earlier. We're going to duplicate that again. We're going to put that inside here underneath of the change score. We're going to put this one back to where it goes, because if it hits that paddle, we want to send it back to the top to a random position, and the top is 180 at the top of the screen. So let's see if this works for us. All right, perfect. We have popping noise, but our score isn't working. So we need to stop and we need to troubleshoot and see what's happening with our score. All right, I went out and I did a little troubleshooting to figure out why my score wasn't working. And it was simply because earlier my score button wasn't showing up over here. So I saved all my code for my catching game project. I exited, I came back in, And when I came back in and reopened the file, my score bubble showed up. So I don't know if that was a glitch with the internet or not, but if your score button doesn't show up after you create that variable, you may have to come out of your particular saved project and then come back into it and reopen it back up. But now that my score button is there, and let's go ahead and try one more time to see if it's working. And so it is now working. So every time I catch that X, I'm gaining a score. And if I don't catch the X and it falls to the bottom, it's still going to respawn to the top. And if I catch it, it respawns as soon as I touch it. And so that is how you create the basic catching game. And so you're going to want to take a look at your project requirements because you're going to need to customize this and add some extra things to your catching game based on your project requirements. So have fun with it, create a great game.